Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be discussing the upcoming 2021 World Juniors for under 20, really the biggest of the World Juniors. And what's even more so is that this sort of marks the beginning of what will end up being the hockey season for a lot of the leagues. Of course, once the World Juniors concludes, about a week later, the NHL is slated to start. A lot of the junior leagues are starting around this time, as well as the AHL. And so the World Juniors will be our first taste of this North American hockey for the first time this season since the playoffs concluded back in early October. And so it'll be interesting to watch. And from a Sharks perspective, the Sharks will have 4 prospects among the 10 teams there. Unfortunately for the Sharks, they would have had 5 prospects had it not been for a pretty unfortunate situation occurring with Thomas Bordelo. Bordelo was a player drafted in the early second round by the Sharks in this past year's draft, the 2020 draft. He had performed exceptionally well through the first few games with the University of Michigan in the NCAA, tied for the team lead in points on that team, as well as 4th in the league, the entire NCAA, in terms of points per game. But unfortunately, he was rooming with a player who ended up coming down with the coronavirus, and of course, being with a player who had the coronavirus, Bordelo was just not allowed to actually compete. So the Sharks would have had him representing the United States on their World Juniors team, but now the Sharks only with 4 representatives on 3 different teams. First one being Adam Raska, a forward on the Czech Republic. The Sharks drafted him in the 7th round of the 2020 draft. The Czech Republic are rarely a super competitive team at the World Juniors under 20, and so Raska sort of makes this team because there's not that many better options out there for the Czech Republic to take from. I wouldn't say Raska is necessarily a player who you need to keep an eye on. I don't think he's going to explode and really surpass so many expectations. There's a reason he was taken in the 7th round. But if you are someone who wants to keep an eye on every single Sharks prospect, he certainly is at the tournament. The next one is a bit more of an interesting one. Santeri Hata from Finland, a defenseman, sort of plays in a Radim Šimek style of way. Obviously, a lot of the big, up-and-coming prospect defensemen have that good mix of offense and defense to their game. Hataka much more on the defensive side. The offensive side does leave a bit to be desired, which is why he ended up being a 4th round pick in the 2019 draft, but he still is quite solid. He has now played at the top league in Finland this past season. He was on the World Juniors team under 20 last year with Finland when they got the runner-up for the bronze medal, so they came 4th place. He will be with them again. He is an alternate captain, which is of course always a good news when one of your prospects can get a leadership role, because it shows that they have some leadership qualities in them. And so we'll see how Hataka can do. As I said, he's more of a shutdown defenseman, so if he can play a good role in shutting down some of the high-flying offensive stars that will always be at a tournament like this, like on Teams Canada or the United States or Russia, that could bode well for the Sharks. Ataka is definitely one that we can keep an eye on. And finally, 2 other prospects, both on Team Russia. A defenseman, Artemis Nyazev, who was the Sharks' first pick in the 2019 draft, ended up being a 2nd rounder, as the Sharks did not have their 1st rounder that year. On the complete opposite side of the spectrum from Hataka is that Artemis Nyazev is definitely an offensive-minded player. He has played some games at the pro level this season thus far, but in the junior league of the KHL as well as in the 2nd league. So basically, the KHL is the, equivalent of the NHL in Russia. Then there is the VHL, which is the equivalent of the AHL. And then there is the MHL, which is sort of like the junior league for Russian players, which I guess would be the equivalent of the CHL. And so Knyazov has spent some time in the MHL, sometimes in the VHL this past season. And we'll see how he does at a sort of more open, you could say, tournament for Team Russia, who is, of course, always quite competitive going for the gold medal. And then finally, Jagor Spirodonov, also drafted in the 2019 draft, also in the 4th round like Hataka. He is a forward. An interesting one, I would say, is that he has also spent some time in the VHL and the MHL this season at the pro level, but also a couple of games at the KHL level. And normally I wouldn't necessarily pay too much attention to that, as of course in the KHL there are a good amount of teams, but only a few of them are usually consistently competitive, because the KHL does lack a bit of the parity that you see at the NHL level. However, he ended up making his debut playing 2 games with SKA St. Petersburg, and St. Petersburg is, of course, one of those teams that is normally quite consistent. So being able to break out and actually make and play a couple of games with a team like St. Petersburg in the KHL is definitely quite impressive, at least compared to, doing it with, let's say, the Kunlun Red Star, I believe, is another teams there who are normally quite not competitive in the KHL. So it'll be interesting to see and watch Team Russia, 2 Sharks representing this one. So unfortunately, we will not see Bordelo, who likely would have been the most very interesting prospect to watch from the Sharks side, but these 4 will certainly show up, I would say. Hata, Nyazev, and Spirodonov in particular, I think, will be ones that will be interesting to watch, and we'll see if the Sharks do have as barren of a prospect pool as many people say, or maybe if there are some diamonds in the rough here. Class dismissed.